Hey everybody, Mr. Quick here. Today we're going to be talking about Eureka Math / Engage New York Math, Module 2, Lesson 5, Creating Division Stories. Now, throughout math, we look at word problems all the time, right? We read stories that involve math and we solve the math. In this case, this lesson challenges you to write your own math problem. To do that, I'm going to go through an example here and we're going to jump into it. So let's do it. All right, so I'm going to give you just a math example to start off with. We're going to say 1/2 divided by 1/8. Now, a couple of ways we can do this problem. I'm going to show you a few different ways to solve it. One, we can create a model, right? Here's my tape diagram. This whole thing is 1, right? So if that's the case, then this is 1/2. And we want to know how many times 1/8 goes into 1/2. How many 1/8ths are there in 1/2? Now, what helps me remember kind of the order of things would be this. If I said 6 divided by 2, I know that 2 goes into 6 3 times. I think when we get to fractions, sometimes it gets a little bit confusing because they are fractions. They're not numbers we're used to working with as much. And so you look at this and you might think, well, is it half goes into 1/8 or 1/8 goes into half, or what's the deal here? And if you just take a minute and say, okay, I'm going to substitute two easy numbers. For example, 6 and 2, right? I know it's how many times this number goes into that number. So over here, we're looking at how many times this number goes into that number. So we have our 1/2, right? We took our tape diagram, split it in half. Now I want to know how many times 1/8 goes into that. So that means I'm going to take this same information here and I've got to break it down. This whole thing is 1, so I've got to create eighths, right? We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I know that each of these are 1/8, right? And if I look at the whole thing, right, one whole total, then I would have 8/8. But I'm not looking at that. I'm going to look only at this side, right? Because we're looking at 1/2. Well, if you count, we've got 1/8, 2/8, 3/8, 4/8, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 4 eighths in 1/2. That's only one simple way to solve it. Another way we could do it, we could do a little keep, change, flip action, right? 1/2, change the division to multiplication, flip the 1/8 to 8/1. We end up with 1 times 8 is 8, 2 times 1 is 2, 8 halves, 2 goes into 8 exactly 4 times. So there's our math, right? That's a couple different ways to look at it. Now, what if I tasked you with using that same equation, but creating a word problem out of it? Before I do that, let me show you one other method. We'll kind of get all the methods in real quick. So if I have 1/2 divided by 1/8, I see that 2 goes into 8 equally, right? So that would be, I'd use that and go times 4. So 1 times 4 is 4. 2 times 4 is 8. I've got division, and I've got my two denominators are the same. So really I'm looking at 4 divided by 1, or 4/1. Once again, that equals 4. So there's different ways to do that. They're all on the screen here. I'm going to move forward, but I want you to be able to come back to this so you can always obviously rewind it and look at the different methods we used. Okay, so here I'm going to give you an example of a word problem that we could use if we were tasked with creating a word problem based around this equation. So remember, we're looking at 1/2 divided by 1/8. Okay, a few different ways we can look at this. Here's one. All right, here's one equation, or here's one story problem, word problem here that I just wrote. Well, this actually comes straight from Eureka Math. I should give them credit, right? But I just typed, I should say. Okay. Bonnie the baker has 1/2 pound of chocolate. She needs 1/8 pound for each batch of brownies she bakes. How many batches can she bake with 1/2 pound? So this is what she has, and she needs to use 1/8 each time she makes a batch of brownies. So we're looking at how many times 1/8 goes into 1/2, right? Because if we have 1/2, we can only make so many batches of brownies because each batch uses 1/8. So this is one example of a word problem that you could write. Now, could we write that in a different way? Could we use the same numbers and write a completely different equation or different word problem, different division story, however you want to look at it? Absolutely. Here's another one. All right, here's another problem. Tina uses 1/8 ounces of sugar each time she makes a batch of cookies. How many batches of cookies can she make if she has 1/2 ounces of sugar left? Or 1/2 ounce of sugar left. So the reason I want to look at this problem is because this is the same problem as before. She has 1/2, and we want to know how many times 1/8 can go into that 1/2 because that's what she's using to cook. Now what I want to point out though, and this is a key whether you're writing these problems, which we'll do in class, but honestly you won't do that often, or when you're solving these kind of problems, which that is where you'll see this quite often, is if you remember the last problem that we just looked at, it was reverse. It said Bonnie Baker had 1/2 pound of chocolate. She needs 1/8 pound for each batch. So it had them in the right order. I say right order, but the same order of the equation. It had the 1/2 first and the 1/8 second. This problem does not have them in that same order. So if you just looked at this and said, okay, well, it's 1/8 divided by 1/2, you'd get the wrong answer. You have to really read the question and think about it in terms of what you're actually doing. If you have 1/2 ounces of sugar, right? And each time that you make a batch of cookies, you're using 1/8. Then you make another batch, you're using another 1/8. Then you're using another 1/8. Then you're using another 1/8, etc., right? You've got to take that half that you have and split it up into the 1/8 ounces. Okay? Give you another quick example. You could say Eugenia has 1/2 yards of ribbon, like a 1/2 yard of ribbon. For each party decoration, she needs 1/8. How many decorations can she make, right? Well, we're still looking at 1/2, dividing it up into 1/8 sections. We're not looking at 1/8 that you have total and dividing it into 1/2 inch sections or yard sections, right? So it's taking what you have and what you're dividing it into. Okay, we're going to talk about this more, if I can speak, easy for me to say, right? We're going to talk more about this in class, and we're going to go through some more examples. But I really like this example because, again, if you just took 1/8 divided by 1/2, you would not get it correct, right? And that's not what you're actually doing. So it's good to be able to think about it, like we talk about this in class all the time, but to be able to think about it in real terms. So, okay, that's all I have. We'll talk more in class. Thanks for watching.